Today we've got a very special, very special art talk for you. My good friend, Mr. Danny Lichtenfeld, is the director of the Brattleboro Museum. The Brattleboro Museum in Brattleboro, Vermont, which is the only Brattleboro. I believe it's the only Brattleboro in God's green earth.
That's what they say.
That's what they say. And the Brattleboro Art Museum is housed in the former Brattleboro train station, which was built in what, like 1912 or so? You know?
1915.
1915. And it is a remarkable museum for such a small community as Brattleboro. Brattleboro's kind of metro Brattleboro is maybe 15,000, 18,000 people.
Yeah.
But you've had some really amazing shows there.
Thanks.
And I am fortunate enough that I'm going to have a show there next year. But what I thought we'd do today is, I think a lot of the people who watch these reasonably fine art talks are interested in about just how a museum works, you know? So Danny, can you just talk a little about the museum and about what it's like trying to run a museum during the time of COVID?
Sure. So we're a contemporary art museum, a small contemporary art museum. We have our space, which are all the old train station rooms, is divided up into 6 galleries and occupying about a total of 3,500 or 4,000 square feet, galleries of different sizes. And unlike, I don't know, 98% of art museums out there, we do not have a collection. You know, most museums exist, they're founded in, to be the repository of some important collection, and then the collection grows over time. That is not the case with our museum. When our museum was founded in 1972, it was because the building was falling into disrepair, and there was a group of people in Brattleboro, Vermont, who wanted to save the building from being demolished, and said, we'll turn it into an art museum and an art center. So we've grown since then, but so we fit into this small category of art museums known as non-collecting art museums. So that's a big difference. Like if you're talking to a museum director who's running a museum that has a collection, then everything having to do with the collection is a major part of that, institution's identity and the work that everyone there has to do. We don't do that at all. We have a different kind of operation. So the way we organize our exhibits and our related programming, we borrow artwork from artists, from collectors, from other museums, from the galleries that represent artists. And we curate our shows based on what we want to show, and our exhibits, the way we organize our schedule, our exhibits are up for 3 or 4 months. And then we take everything down and send it back and spend a week changing over all the galleries and put up new exhibits. So we currently operate on a schedule where we change over 3 or 4 times a year, and we have the 6 galleries to work with. So in a given year, usually we have a different exhibit in each gallery. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes one exhibit will spread throughout the whole building and occupy all the rooms, very rarely. So if we're having 5 or 6 exhibits up at a time, and we're changing over 3 or 4 times a year, we're curating 15 or 20 exhibits every year. And we have curators who do that. I don't do much of that. I've done a little bit of curating. As the director, my job, generally speaking, is more to oversee the whole operation and the business side of the operation, and of course, a lot of fundraising. But so we have curators who are primarily they're on the front lines of deciding what exhibits are we going to show and how are they going to hang in the galleries. And then building off the exhibits, we do a lot of educational programming. Before COVID, we would have hundreds of school field trips come to the museum every year. And we do lots and lots of events in the galleries and out in the community, artist talks and film screenings and lectures and workshops and things like that. And we've transitioned in the last 6 or 7 months to doing many of those events online. And yeah, that's kind of our, generally speaking, how our operation works. But I can drill down and to whatever extent you want me to.
What brought you to the Brattleboro Museum, and what was your journey?
Totally not traditional, unexpected. My background was mainly in music. I had a real esoteric kind of background in music. I got degrees. I got undergraduate and graduate degrees in music theory, but I got very interested in studying non-Western music, and in particular, Native American music from some communities out in New Mexico. And but I also had done a lot of choral singing and some music teaching and stuff like that. So when I finished school, I thought I was going to get like a PhD in I finished my master's. I was taking a little break, living in New Mexico, studying music of San Juan Pueblo, which is north of Santa Fe, and thinking that I was just taking a hiatus en route to getting a PhD or something in ethnomusicology, maybe, or music theory or something like that, and then I would be a professor. But that while I was living out there in New Mexico, I got a call to apply for a job as the choral director and director of music at the Roxbury Latin School in Boston. And so I did that. And then all of that work and stuff I had been doing kind of in Native American music and possibly pursuing ethnomusicology, which was already starting to feel a little weird and a little culturally appropriative. And like I was starting to have a kind of an identity crisis around that stuff that I was doing. And so instead I became this teacher. But then I did that for a few years, and then I got involved in nonprofits. But the nonprofit work I was doing was always had a music connection. And so I moved to Southern Vermont when I was hired to run a summer chamber music festival here in Putney, Vermont, called Yellow Barn Music Festival, as you know. And did that for a few years, and then learned that my friend and predecessor at the Brattleboro Museum was leaving his position, and talked with him about that, and discovered that running a small nonprofit arts organization in this corner of the world, even though it primarily had to do with music, meant doing a lot of the same things as running a small nonprofit arts organization that's primarily involved in visual arts, namely this museum. So, and I've always loved contemporary art, although I didn't have any kind of formal training in museum studies or anything. So I applied for the job, and for some reason they hired me, and that was 13 years ago.
Now, you say that the Brattleboro Museum is one of only a small number of museums that doesn't have a collection. Was that and it seems like you're saying that was because the original impetus for its existence was to keep the building from falling down. I know that over the last few years, the museum has been very closely associated with Wolf Kahn.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any thoughts of eventually building a collection? I mean, Wolf Kahn and Emily Masson were very involved in the museum. I don't know if they left the museum stuff, but can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, for sure. So, right, initially, the choice, if you want to call it a choice, to be a non-collecting museum was that nobody was coming forward with a collection and saying, will you please create a museum and accept my collection? However, you know, once we kind of once the museum put its shingle out and is there in this very impressive old building, inevitably people over the years have said, my mother collected all these works of Vermont painters, and I would, if I'd like to donate them to your museum. And then we have to say, well, we're a non-collecting museum. We'd happily accept your donation, but it would be for the purposes of trying to sell the work, auction it off, and raise money for our general operation. So we've had, opportunities over the years to think about becoming a collecting museum and have continuously chosen not to.
Is that an ongoing discussion like the board of directors and the staff have?
Yeah, I would say it's ongoing in like slow motion, occasional spurts. It comes up. Usually there's something that will prompt it to come back to the surface and be discussed and considered. However, you're really astute to bring up Wolf Kahn and Emily Mason, kind of our local Southern Vermont art superstars, both of whom died in the past year after, spending a good portion of every year here for the last 50 years and being very involved with our museum. So we have plans that we're currently raising money to expand the museum, continue operating in the train station building, but also build a new building kind of just across the street.
Right, and you'd announced those plans right prior to COVID, if memory serves.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's very ambitious, right? You've acquired the property.
Exactly.
The buildings are like have PCBs in them or something? Or
there's a little bit of contamination in this.
Creative spaces. There's some.
Yeah, exactly.
It was a different organization than the PCB problem.
Yes, it was. That was, I think our local youth theater has had a big PCB problem. The property that we acquired has a little bit of like residual, formerly industrial kind of contamination in the ground, but it's not a big deal. But what I was going to say to the point, the question you were asking earlier about collections, we don't want to reduce the scope of our rotating exhibit operation. We want to be able to continue to do rotating exhibits the way at least to the extent that we do now. But with the new building, adding gallery space, one of the things that we plan to do is to have galleries that are dedicated on a long-term basis to showing the work of Wolf Kahn and Emily Mason, maybe their teachers or their students, people who have influenced them or whom they've influenced. We don't want to own the work. And so we still won't technically be a collecting museum. What we discussed with them before they died was to have an arrangement with their foundation where on a long-term basis, we can count on borrowing artwork of theirs to exhibit and then change it out. But we won't change those exhibits out as frequently as we change out our rotating exhibits now. It'll probably be like once a year, we'll put up a new Wolf Kahn and Emily Mason exhibit alongside our rotating exhibits.
And it's sort of thematically, there'd be a through line for associated exhibits.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I love the variety. I think all of us currently involved in the museum love the crazy variety of our rotating exhibits.
Right.
Currently.
Now, why? What would you say if a group of people who were going to start a museum came to you? Would you say, yeah, you should really think about being a non-collection museum, or would you say, boy, if we were to start this again, we'd totally be a collecting museum? What?
I think it would just depend on the circumstances, honestly, and then just be clear about what you are and what that means in terms of what kind of staff you need, what kind of facility you need, what kind of programming you're going to do. I mean, if you're going to be a collecting museum, then presumably there's some important societal reason why that work has been collected and should be preserved and studied and viewed for a long, long time. So that's great. And if you decide you want to start a museum around a collection and it seems to make sense and be of value to society for that collection to be preserved and studied and exhibited, maybe loaned out to other institutions, then I think that's a great thing to do. I also think being a non-collecting museum is a great thing to do. And there's all kinds of flexibility and freedom that is really fun, to be able to take advantage of.
Your description is that the Brattleboro Museum is a contemporary art museum.
Yeah.
What when you say the word contemporary, what does that encompass? That seems it's open-ended, which is great.
Absolutely. Yeah, we try to keep it really open-ended. We don't have any kind of like real dogmatic, like we only show this stuff, or, and I say that word and I don't mean like capital C. I don't even know what capital C contemporary necessarily means. So what it means for us, we show almost all the exhibits we show are work by living artists. And we basically try to strike a balance between, we live in a region with, you know, both kind of locally in southern Vermont and Vermont, but also New England, with so many terrific artists and so many different artistic traditions and styles. So we feel like one real important thing we can do is provide a platform and, you know, showcase for the world that variety of really high-level museum quality work being made by people who are alive today. And in some cases, it's highly, highly figurative drawing, and in other cases, it's, you know, the off-the-wall, most conceptual, performance-based kind of stuff. You know, it spans the gamut. The other thing that we really feel like we can do that is important and worth doing and has a bearing on the kind of artwork we show, we feel like we can be of service to people who live in our largely rural area by bringing artwork, big-time artists and artwork that you would have to travel to museums or galleries in New York or maybe Boston, maybe Montreal to see, but bring that right to Brattleboro. And then kids in public schools in these tiny little towns in southern Vermont get to come to our museum and see Andy Warhol and, you know, stuff like that. So we feel like that's also an important service we can play. So it's kind of a balance of bringing the great big wide art world to Brattleboro, but also showcasing our region's artistic riches for the wider world.
Right. Well, a couple of years ago, I curated a show for the museum, and I was very interested. I'd never had that experience before.
Yeah.
And I was interested in, and next year I'll be doing there'll be a show of my work that Eric Aho is curating. But I was very interested to, for the first time, really think about what the role of a curator is. Now, and you guys are lucky to have the wonderful Mara. Is it Mara Williams? Yeah. But I mean, she's this. She's a character. She's extremely smart, and she has opinions, which I love. And you and she were wonderful wells for me to go to start to understand what the role of the curator is. So, and given the fact that you've got 6 galleries and you're doing so many shows a year,
yeah,
you're also educating a bunch of people in the art of curation, are you not?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And yes, I think we are doing that. And there's a variety in the curation as well, or what the task of curation entails, depending on the nature of the exhibit. So, you know, in some ways, maybe the most involved kind of curatorial task or, you know, job to be done is the kind of show that you curated, where you're choosing to show work by a bunch of different artists, and presumably there's some connecting thread. In that case, it was artwork having to do with railroad imagery. But it, you know, it could, whatever the connecting thread could be. It could be new forms of abstraction, or it could be artwork inspired by Black Lives Matter, or whatever it is. But when it's a group show and you're talking about pulling lots of different artists' work together and maybe also, different mediums. So not just painting, but sculpture and drawing and video, perhaps. That can get, there's a lot to juggle and a lot to manage from the curatorial standpoint in order to end up with a coherent aesthetic and intellectual experience for the visitor, which I think fundamentally is what we're after. What we encourage guest curators, I think the way Mara, who does much of our curating, thinks about what she's trying to do, and what we encourage our guest curators to do is ask the question, what do you want a viewer to take away after spending however much time they're going to spend in this gallery looking at this work you put together, and let that inform the artwork that you're selecting, and also the way it's hung in the space, but also, really importantly for us, the type of writing that is going to accompany the exhibit. Because I think you and I have a similar sensibility about art speak. Maybe you're even a little more extreme than I am when it comes to art speak, but we do not want, we want to write about the artwork. We want to write about the exhibits in a way that a reasonably intelligent person, open-minded, curious person can understand, even if they have no formal background in art history or art technique. And so we really try to avoid jargon. And I, coming from a non-museum background and not a lot of formal training in visual art, speaking for myself, I feel like I can be a pretty good kind of like BS gauge, when I'm reading what's the drafts of what's been written, and so that's an important part of the curating too. What is going to be written, and how it's written.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you guys are selecting, I'm sorry, I've got a cat on my lap who's
that's okay.
Trying to be interactive here, and sliding off my lap. When you're looking at the next 2-3 years, I get the feeling you're looking generally 2 or 3 years down the road at what you've got coming up. How are you? Is it a mix of, there are shows that you and Mara and the staff sitting around saying, gosh, we really should do something about such and such? Or are you approached by people who say, I'd really like to curate a show about, modern clothing?
Right.
Or are you approached by artists who are like, show my work, show my work, or I'll go blow up the museum? How is it all three of those things happen?
Yes, it is all of those. But I think I came to you and said, we want to let us show your work.
Yeah, that's true. I'm thinking
just for the record. Just for the record. Yeah, it's all of those. And honestly, the second and third of the three that you mentioned, a curator coming to us and saying, I have this idea and I want to do it, or an artist sending us pictures or sending me a link to look at, and would you look at my work and consider it for an exhibit? That's a narrow pipeline there, because we have no shortage. We're like, our staff and the curators that we work with always have their feelers out, and are planning so far in advance. It's like we always have a backlog of ideas. So stuff that just comes across the transom, it's pretty rare that stuff lands on the schedule, and not necessarily because it's of lesser quality or wouldn't make sense at some other point. It's just that the schedule's full. I mean, 15 to 20 exhibits sounds like a lot, but our group that kind of oversees this part of our operation meets every couple months or so to plan ahead and keep the ball rolling, and we have a list that only ever grows of other ideas that somebody has had and somebody brings to the table and wants to share. And we all say, that looks amazing. That would be awesome to do. Let's put it on the list for when there's an opening.
Right.
At some point. So the stuff that just comes in across the transom, that's tough for us. You know, we try to honor the effort that artists or people representing artists are making by putting that together and writing to us and sending us that stuff. We try to at least honor that effort by looking at it all. Twice a year, we have kind of just like a review session of anything that came over the transom. And in fact, I think on our website, we have some instructions about if you want us to look at your stuff, we will do it twice a year. And maybe we'll get back to you, and maybe it'll work its way into the exhibition schedule. But even that, I think, is more than most museums do.
Well, back 20 years ago, I used to be a music manager, and you know, that basically is how the music business worked. You know, people send in a zillion tapes to the record label. 20 years ago, sending in. And maybe someone would listen to it once. So if you actually have, you know, get-togethers twice a year to go through the submitted stuff, that's quite something. Now, the last thing I wanted before we go, I wanted to ask you, what, as a regional artist, you know, I am each year for your fundraiser, you know, you guys solicit me to donate a piece. For artists who want to see, I mean, the art world, the visual art world is an entire ecosystem. And we've got the painters, we've got the galleries, we've got the museums, and it feels to me like we all sort of have to support one another. I've been donating a fair number of paintings this year, especially because of COVID. I assume that the fare box, the admissions through the door, are a significant, though not dominant, income stream for you guys. And that income stream has been taken away this year. But for artists who are watching this, who want to make sure that the entire ecosystem of art survive this challenging period, what would you suggest they do? What's the most helpful thing that artists can do?
That's really kind of you to ask that, Charlie. And so certainly, as you're mentioning, one thing they can do, and one thing that we often ask of you and other artists in our area is, would you consider donating a piece for us to auction off or raffle off or something like that? And that's really important for us. And so I bet wherever the artists are who are watching this, there's some fabulous local museum or some other nonprofit organization in their area that is trying to make ends meet similarly, doing raffles or auctions or something like that. And so that's one really great way that artists can help. You also are a member of our museum, which I really, value and appreciate. And so I bet there are local museums where people watching could take out a membership or upgrade their membership. So that's another really helpful way. And yes, it's true that admissions and gift shop sales and things like that, they've taken a huge hit during COVID, but those were not even really our bread and butter. Like, that's not how we paid the bills really even before COVID. Art museums rely excessively on donations, memberships, grants, things like that, and fundraising events. So it's in those areas where artists and others can probably be most helpful for whether it's our museum or the equivalents thereof, around the country. And wherever
one last question on that.
Yeah.
You only have that very big fundraiser at Allison's Orchard, which
right.
is, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great heritage orchard, and it's also a destination place for weddings and stuff.
Yeah.
But this year you had to do it remotely as opposed to physical things.
Right.
How did it go? How did it go? How was the money?
It was great. It was a huge success, and it was really interesting the way in which it was a success, because we a kind of a mom and pop auction house in Burlington, Vermont, agreed to auction off the items that we would otherwise have auctioned off in person had we been able to do our gala at Allison's Orchard. And their business model, like every mom and pop auction house around the world now, doesn't rely primarily on people actually showing up in person and bidding and raising their paddles and stuff. They all subscribe to these real-time online services. So you'll have several hundred people from anywhere around the world who are participating in the bidding when that little auction is happening in Burlington, Vermont, with like 12 people sitting in the showroom. So what that meant for us was that the things that were donated that we were able to auction off that way, that had a really established market value beyond our region, those items did way, way better in that format than we could have done if we were selling them to the 100 people assembled in the room at our gala. Interestingly, however, the artwork that we were auctioning off that was donated by local artists who do not necessarily have a real established secondary market for their work, and whose reputations are, don't necessarily go far beyond our region, I think we did a little worse with those items than we would have done in person, because in person, there's also the peer pressure factor of this artist is our invited guest who's sitting at the table next to you and who has donated this piece, and who's going to bid, who's raising their hand. There's that peer pressure element that was missing from this online auction. So that's something we're really going to think about as we figure out what to do going forward, because I'm endlessly grateful to you and all the artists who donate for our auctions. And I really, really feel a personal obligation. Like, I don't want to let this artwork go for peanuts. Like I want to make it worth your while and our while. And I certainly don't want to undermine the efforts that all of you are making to establish a real market value for your work by having the pieces go for too little. So really going to think about that if we have to do an online auction again in the future.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Now, people who want to learn more about the Brattleboro Museum, what's the website? What's the website, Danny?
People should go to brattleboromuseum.org, and especially soon they'll find under upcoming exhibits on our website information about your exhibit that is coming down the pike. I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember right now. Is it this coming summer? Is it summer of 2021? I can't remember the dates right now.
I think it is. It's the summer of 2021.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. And so if there's not already information on our website about your upcoming exhibit, Charlie, it will be up there soon. But meantime, if you want, there's lots of other information on our website as well for people to check out.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Danny.
Thank you.
And thank you all out there in internet land. Thanks for joining us for the Reasonably Fine Art Talk. Be sure to visit my website, www.hunter-studio.com. That's the working artist website, as opposed to the artsy artist website. But anyway, Danny, it was great to see you. Take good care. Wash your hands, and bye-bye.
And vote. And register to vote. And vote.
And vote.
All right. Thank you.